The following is a presentation of Project Independence and WCWP. Project Independence is the Aging in Place initiative of the town of North Hempstead.
Welcome to Project Independence and You.
Good morning and welcome to Community Talk Radio. This is Project Independence and You on LIU Public Radio. I'm your host and producer, Kristina Liu, along with my co-host today, Otto Los. Otto is a volunteer, supporter, Project Independence member, more importantly, my friend. And we are having a really important topic today. I'm so excited to have the Fair Housing Justice Center on. And it's Britny McKenzie, who is the policy director, and Anusha Nair, who is the intake and outreach specialist. And we're talking all things about this wonderful organization and what goes into it. And I know you have a fund as well that's part of it. So I'm excited to learn more about it. So welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
So I think starting from the beginning, what is the Fair Housing Justice Center?
Yeah, so we are a nonprofit civil rights organization based in New York City. We were founded in 2005, and our primary mission is to end housing discrimination and make communities more inclusive and accessible to people. So we serve the 5 boroughs of New York City. We, particularly for our population right now, we serve Nassau County and Suffolk County. We do Dutchess, Rockland, Orange, and Putnam and Westchester County as well.
Oh, wow.
A lot of territory.
Yeah, I know. I'm tired already. Yeah. A lot of houses, right?
Where do you get your, like somebody has a problem? We'll get into what is discrimination, but somebody has a problem with the discrimination. How do they first get involved with you?
They can give us a phone call.
Right.
Or they can report anonymously. We are on social media. We do a lot of community outreach, so people get to know about their fair housing rights, what is discrimination. So we get referrals through like different organizations. So there's a lot of different ways that people can come to us.
Yeah.
Now, who supports it? You use the letters FHJC?
Yeah.
Does it?
That's
Right.
the acronym.
For Fair Housing
Yeah,
Justice.
Fair Housing
Yeah.
Justice
Yeah.
Center. It's a mouthful
Who
sometimes.
basically supports the program?
Yeah. So we're a nonprofit. We have a 3-pronged mission. The first is to eliminate housing discrimination. The second is to make communities more inclusive, open, accessible for folks. And then the third one is to strengthen the fair housing laws that already exist out there. So when you think about supporters, it's really everyone. So community members, elected officials, other organizations. We really try to work in community with everyone because we know we can't fulfill our mission without being involved with the community members and people in the government, elected leaders, in the government. So we make sure to also stay in connection with other organizations that do similar work and have similar mission. So I'd say that's how we stay in community and have supporters. And it's a very broad spectrum of individuals and organizations.
What, I've been reading, getting prepared for the show. When you think of discrimination, you don't always think of everything that
is underneath it, yeah.
All right. Like there's some obvious, like skin color has been forever, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And yet there are other forms of discrimination. How about just give us like a little overview of what people should pay attention to that makes discrimination?
Yeah, definitely. I would say the Fair Housing Act of 1968 was passed, and that was really the beginning of housing being a civil right. It's a very critical issue, especially now as we're thinking about the housing crisis, the affordability shortage, and just everything that's going on in our nation. And so that really that act paved the way for our organization and just protection. So initially, the Federal Fair Housing Act only had, I believe, 7.
Yes.
There's so many protected characteristics now, which is great.
Yeah.
But I believe it started off with 7. So race, national origin, sex, disability, could be a little wrong here, but it started off with 7 and then added, I believe, then disability. Our state law is very expansive. We have protected classes, including veterans, source of income, which you'll hear me talk about a little bit more later.
There's familial status.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so our state law is really broad. And then in the city where we're located is also broad. It expands. We just recently had two more protected characteristics added. You'd be surprised, but height and weight, these are things that people face discrimination
Wow.
based on
Yeah, I
or
mean,
where
like,
they live. Yeah. And then Nassau County also has a lot of the same overlapping protected characteristics. Suffolk has a little bit more. So yeah, that's pretty much the starting was that Fair Housing Act, and then New York has always been more progressive,
Right.
including more protected characteristics than any other state really in the
Wow.
nation.
And do you find that it's an issue that's increasing the discrimination factor? I know we were talking a little bit offline, but before we got on, and why is it such a big issue still? Like is it something that you find that's growing or it's getting better because there is more protected classes or
I think there's just a lot of creative ways that
yeah, you can get like around like these
yes,
things or
there's a lot of creative ways you can get around it. So let's take source of income discrimination, for example. That is for those that are voucher holders, right? So it could be Section 8, city FEPS, any type of rental assistance you get to pay for a particular type of housing. So, like agents could, ghost you once they hear you have a voucher.
Mhm.
And I'll
Or,
pause you and say ghosting is exactly what you think it
Yeah.
is.
yes.
They just disappear and you don't hear from them.
Yes. So I might inquire about an apartment on Street Easy. And I might, disclose information that I have a voucher. And once the agent hears that I have a voucher,
You're
I don't hear back. Or it could just be like I send a general inquiry and then we're moving on the process. And then I get the opportunity to see the place. And then once it's time for me I'm interested and I request an application, then it could be the agent doesn't want to give me an application.
And I want to jump in and highlight that it's subtle. It's very subtle.
Right.
You have to put yourself in the perspective of someone looking for an apartment, right? Or looking for their home where they want to purchase. It's not the first thought in your mind that someone doesn't want you to have
Right.
this opportunity, right? You're looking at maybe 5 houses a day, 5 apartments a day, and someone is just saying, "Oh, sorry, we don't have anything." It's hard to prove as an individual, and it's very complex. And that's why we have an investigative department that does systemic testing, and we do complaint-based testing. So the systemic testing is we use a variety our investigative folks, not myself, but our investigative team uses a lot of data and information. Just to speak a little bit more to it, we use professional actors. We call them testers, and they pose as renters, buyers, to see if people are being treated differently based on the protected characteristics. So, age, race, disability, source of income that we mentioned. I'm not sure if we said what it really is, but source of income is a form of payment that people would use besides just like their regular something coming from their job.
Yep,
So
like
let's
a
say
voucher.
Social Security, a voucher, Section 8, a subsidy, anything along those lines.
Let me ask you though, like as a person who might be on the other end of the spectrum, all right? Uh, you have to look at the fact that whoever is providing the housing is paying for something. They have a home, they're renting an apartment or whatever. How do they know that the person can pay them? As a person who's providing the housing, you really have a right to know that you're going to get paid.
Yeah.
What's the thinking on that?
Yeah. And you're referring to like housing providers, right? Someone
Yeah,
who'd be
that, like
providing.
whatever the housing might be,
Yeah.
you have to, if it's rental of an apartment or whatever, you have to really be in a position. Maybe I, as the person who's providing the housing, have my own financial problems, and I really need this money to be
Yeah.
able to pay for my house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you think about folks who are using a lawful source of income, they're already vetted. They're already vetted
And they
by.
go through this process too. So
Okay,
it's
so
like
that
There you
kind
go,
of
right.
is considered as
there's like a section
all looking at the
voucher
other
program.
person's side.
Yes, there's a series of like approval levels before you
Okay.
This is
get
coming
the
from
apartment.
the government, right?
Right,
Like this
so
is a
you are
government
looking at the other
institution.
side, in other words, that the people are entitled to get paid. That if they rent to somebody who truly can afford it because they're whatever problems they might have. Uh, you as a homeowner wouldn't really want to rent to somebody who can't pay you. I don't
Yeah.
think, you know.
Yeah. I think that's a valid concern. I think that's a valid concern. And when you're thinking about folks who have a lawful source of income like Social Security, they've been vetted, right? They've already been checked to see how much they can afford. They're given a certain amount. They've done a very rigorous background check to make sure that they're getting this money because they need it, and that the money that they're getting will be,
Utilized
paid.
for that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And that the unit is passes inspection, and that it's in livable condition, and that the person could pay, or the voucher could cover the rent.
So then
Yeah,
it's a fair for both sides is what it comes down to.
That is correct.
You're going to get paid and you are going to be able to rent the place. As you pointed out at the beginning, Brittany, the market is pretty pathetic right now.
Yeah.
And it's bad for everybody, no matter what
Yeah.
your situation,
Yeah.
which makes it even worse, I think, as far as discrimination goes, because, you know,
You're right.
now I'm going to give you one more scenario, all right?
Sure.
You have to understand, I grew up in a world where, fortunately for me, I guess I went to a high school that was mixed back in the Brooklyn, Queens borderline in the 50s. And I didn't know any different. To me, it was like, so, okay, this person is black, and I talk to them all the time. They're friends. That's not how the outer world was then.
Yeah.
I was in the Navy. I went to Jacksonville, Florida, and I found out how terrible the situation really was. All right. And then I grew up in the world that blockbusting came along, and they chased people out by fear.
Yeah.
And that was real estate people who
Yeah.
did that. You know, that they used it as a power mechanism
Yeah.
to wipe out neighborhoods from one group to another group. And people ran, and, you know, that was not good. That was terrible. And I grew up in that world. But in that world also, my parents were lucky enough, and they were just, my father was a milkman, my mother cleaned houses. They were lucky enough to be able to buy a home, a two-family home. And I remember when I became a brilliant teenager, like 15 years old, questioning them about why did they rent the apartment to so-and-so, they could have gotten a lot more money. And their view back then, and they were immigrants, their view was they really wanted to be feeling comfortable with the people who they rented to and not worry about it. So they rented to family or friends at much less than the market rate. And I think that that's something that could happen without discrimination in mind. So my point is, would that be like they didn't even, they were really nobody else involved. They say, oh, Kristina, we'll rent the apartment to you. There's no real discrimination in something like that, I assume.
Yeah. And that's pretty common, actually.
Yeah, because I was just thinking in my head, like I know so many families that, have like a two-family house, and that's
Yeah. It's very common. And no, there's no discrimination there. There's exemptions with the Fair Housing Act, and one of them it's referred to as like the Mrs. Murphy Law. So a two-family house, for example, wouldn't fall under the law. It has that exemption, right? So it wouldn't the landlord, the homeowner, the housing provider in that situation wouldn't, be liable for any issues like that. And again, the thought is that when folks have, such a small unit, it's just one other unit attached to yours, you would give it to your friend, or you would give it to your family member and offer it up. So yeah, pretty common.
And you have, in that scenario, you have the right to choose.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
That's important for people to know. Like they may be thinking, I hope I don't break the rules or the law.
Yeah.
No, that's definitely, and I guess it is something that's certainly a common.
Yeah.
'Cause as you were saying it, I'm like, yeah, oh yeah, well, I got my mom upstairs.
Yeah.
I didn't choose her.
Yeah, but definitely the right to choose is there. And I think, it really becomes more important as we're thinking about larger housing providers, because that's when you can really make that big effect that you were mentioning, like changing a complete neighborhood. So yeah.
So now when you mentioned about this, I know that you guys have a program called Acting for Justice. Is this part of the investigative thing that you were talking about? Is
Yeah,
that program?
yeah, it is. And like I mentioned, we have a diverse number of actors, professional actors, who go out into the field and really observe the practices of housing providers. And we document this through a variety of ways, such as like recording. You may have heard of actually the Newsday investigation, the 29, yeah, Long Island Divided. I would recommend, if you haven't seen it, check it out. There's no paywall, so if you do visit it or you go on YouTube and you type in Long Island Divided Newsday, you'll see it was a 3-year investigative report. Our organization actually was a consultant on that, and so we trained the folks there to be able to go out and pose. So there was real bona fide folks. There were actors and just regular folks who were going out to observe the practices. And what they found in the Newsday investigation was widespread discrimination, racial, in Nassau County and Suffolk County, by real estate agents. And so if you check it out, you'll see, I think, over 50% of the time, and it varied based on race, whether Black, Hispanic, Asian. It was over easily 30%, and it got as high as, I think, over 50% for
Oh, wow.
folks, Black individuals. So yeah, it's still very prevalent, and that was just 2019.
And when people come into our organization to file reports or complaints, the first step is to acknowledge that, hey, this happened to you. This is discrimination, right? But then the next big step is to corroborate what happened to you. And that is a big part of the investigative work that we do. And these investigations take a lot of time.
Oh my
because-
gosh, I could imagine.
Yeah, because we need to gather all the evidence to corroborate what was happening to you.
Yeah, and I would imagine too, as you were saying, it's not so, black and white easy to approve, a lot of
Right.
these things because it is. But oh my gosh, we're gonna have to take a break. So after the break, we will continue talking with Britny McKenzie, who is the policy director at the Fair Housing Justice Center, and Anusha Nair, who is the intake and outreach specialist. We're talking all things fair housing. You're listening to Project Independence in You on LIU Public Radio.
Take WCWP with you wherever you go with the WCWP app. Listen live 24/7 to all of our streams, all from one app. Plus, call the studios directly from the app and visit our social media. Download the app through the iOS App Store on Apple devices or the Google Play Store on Android by searching WCWP Radio, or visit WCWP.org for links. The WCWP app, available now on iOS and Android devices.
Welcome back to Project Independence in You on LIU Public Radio. I'm your host, Kristina Liu, along with my co-host, Otto Los, and we're jumping right back in with Britny McKenzie, who is the policy director at the Fair Housing Justice Center, and Anusha Nair, who is the intake and outreach specialist. And we're just going over all the, things that fall under this. And it's such a complicated, issue with so many layers. And as we were even saying, we were talking during the break about just the idea of what Section 8 is, and vouchers.
By
Because
the
you
way,
don't know, right?
Dan always reprimands me for talking about interesting topics during the
I
break.
like that you're putting that on the record.
And he-
Otto, I like that you put that on the
Well,
record. Yes.
Right? I
He
just
broke his
wanna-
own
I
rule.
just wanna go-
I like it. Someone mark this day down in history. Yes. But it is, it was a really wonderful point because, as Dan brought up, these people are your neighbors, are your
Yeah.
people, your colleagues, your school people, people who are in school with your children.
Yeah.
And I think that there are so many misconceptions, and I'm really glad that you ladies came on to explain that there is a huge process. At the end of the day, no one's just wanting to go on and just be like, I woke up today and I'd love to just be on Section 8 housing.
Right.
It's really, something that, you need to. And as Dan had pointed out, the income level is high, fairly high in Nassau County. So you're thinking, it's just an expense. We all know, Long Island is an expensive place
Yes.
to live,
Yeah.
and it's only increasingly so, and I think that it's important to know, about the process that you guys said about Section 8 and the vouchers and getting it.
Yeah, yeah, and it's just, I think the more we have these conversations, we realize that folks who are needing assistance are hardworking people. They are people who work in our schools. They're educators, they're firefighters, they're folks who are actually in our community, and the fact that we're in an affordability crisis, not only in Long Island, but across New York State. It's a serious affordability crisis. So, we should really have the conversation more. And I think the more we talk about it, we can find solutions and,
Yeah, because that's,
demystify some of
listen,
the,
we're mostly, obviously we're our program, Project Independence, is for
yeah,
seniors.
yeah.
That this housing question is something that comes up. I've been with a program for like 15 years now, and
Hmm.
it comes up so often because it is so tough. And you look around, and you see these new buildings being put up, and they're not affordable housing. It's these I mean,
Yeah,
it's shocking how anyone could afford some of
yeah.
them. So it really is a real crisis. And like with the people that would accept, the different, housing, whether it's an apartment building or whatever, it might be. How do they just choose to say, like, what, I'm going to accept vouchers as part of, payment for my, building or whatever it is? How does that kind of happen?
No. It's
Go ahead.
Well, it's the law.
Yeah.
So if you are a housing provider, you should be following the law. And
Right.
that was passed in 2019 as well,
Right.
across the state, statewide. And Nassau and Suffolk has had that on the books before it
Mhm.
was even the law in the state. So
Oh,
kudos to
yeah,
our local
interesting.
legislators.
Very
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, I think it comes back to a little bit of a society attitude of sometimes looking down on people who are, and it's hard to explain why people might be, not all people, but some, look down on people because of their income or the jobs they have or whatever it might be. And that's part of, to me, the top level problem is changing attitudes. And unfortunately, that's been going on since the beginning of the world.
Hmm.
Somebody's always getting looked down on for the betterment of, in my judgment, of the people who are here. They don't empathize enough with the fact that it could be you. You just happen to be lucky.
Hmm.
Maybe, yes, uh, I did some things on my own that helped me get where I was, but I kind of believe people who try to do what they can to help themselves should be helped. And yes, we all know that there's crookedness that goes on somewhere along the line with everything, all right? And that's one of them. Uh, but on the other side of it, people who are legitimately trying to do what they can do and they can get on Section 8
Hmm.
and, they shouldn't be looked down upon.
Yeah.
And as we say, it gets so complicated, and there's so many things that you might not even be aware is considered, a protected class or discrimination. So if you were unsure, right, you're like, was it? Did this just happen? Is that something they could contact you and just kind of talk it out with you? Like how does that work?
Absolutely. They can always reach out to our organization. We will help them walk them through their facts.
And what's the phone number that someone would reach you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the phone number is 212
Mhm.
400 8201. And we can also be there's a way you can make complaints through online through the website.
Oh, okay.
So there's like this big blue button that says report housing discrimination, and you can just give us your information. You can report anonymously. If you're hesitant, you can also have someone else reach out on your behalf to make a report.
Okay.
So there's various avenues you can make a
Yeah.
report.
And the website is fairhousingjustice.org. So it's FAIR housingjustice.org. Um, and like Anusha said, the FHJC, we're here for you. Our help is free, right? We don't look at folks any income, there's no regard to income. And anyone can call us if they have questions. And I would say usually it's when you have this feeling, this thought, is when I think you should pick up the phone or go to the website, because you'd be shocked. Like I said, we do the investigations, and so we might already have some sort of notice, or maybe a housing provider has to be in compliance with the law because they already broke it. And so you reporting, a situation, whether you're not getting, a reasonable accommodation, excuse me, or, maybe being denied because of the way you're paying, you can give us a call or, go on our website and report the discrimination.
And if like just walk us through the process. So if I, file a complaint anonymously, then do you guys just like how do you like how does it go? Do you reach out immediately to the, housing provider? How does like what's the actual process?
Yeah, so the first step is someone would reach out to our
Mhm.
organization. The process to reach back to them would take about 2 weeks because there's a lot of people calling in. So, we go based on the order of calls, or emails. And then we talk to we talk to the people who are reporting first, get all the facts from them, and then we have a whole dedicated staff behind the scenes who reviews all the facts, and then we determine if it's something we can investigate at this time.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow, yeah.
Many people have their hands in the home provider world. Who would be the major parts of that cycle? Like the landlord, the agent, the
Hmm.
lawyer, you know, who gets into that?
Gets into
To,
Like the
to,
investigate, like I think he's trying to say,
well, to be the ones who really are the most involved with the discrimination process.
So our investigations can go a bunch of different ways. Every investigation is different, but our main job is to corroborate the scenario that the person is reporting to
Gotcha.
us. Yeah. So there's no like one simple way to explain it
Right.
because every
Right, it
scenario
makes sense
is
because it could
very
be like,
different.
I met with this real estate agent or, it could be, so I think as you were saying, it's really the particular situation, how it like
Or
lines
the
up.
type of
Yeah.
housing,
Yeah, I mean,
what the
now with, as I had mentioned, we're obviously geared towards seniors. So what is like the most common, an older adult would experience in relation to the housing?
Yeah. I'll say, as people age, they'll have different needs for their housing, right? So maybe they want to downsize or they want to move closer to home, or they might require a more accessible space. Um, but I think the important thing to realize throughout any of those changes is that everyone has a right to fair housing. And, folks shouldn't face any sort of discrimination based on those factors. So, for instance,
Hmm.
here's some examples of what that could look like. So, a landlord could refuse to rent to someone over 60, assuming that they'll need too much help, right?
Hmm.
That's an example of what discrimination could look like. Or maybe an agent is steering someone to a senior only building, right? And just limiting their options. A housing provider can even deny someone because they ask about installing grab bars, right, in the bathroom. And maybe a condo or co-op could refuse to rent to someone because they have a voucher, right? And they're not using payment coming from their job. So those are some examples of what discrimination could look like, especially as you age and you're experiencing these different needs. And I think everyone should really know that it's important that if you feel or suspect, maybe you notice that you're looking around and you're like, wait, there's no families in this 20 unit apartment complex. What's going on here? That's kind of strange. There's a school right nearby.
Right.
Maybe you want to give FHJC a call and say, you know, I noticed that this apartment complex has absolutely no children. Or maybe you notice or you hear the person working at the complex saying, we really want to keep this community in aligned with the character of the way things have always been. And that could be a little code for we don't want to welcome
Yeah.
everyone.
Right.
And when you don't welcome everyone, you're excluding people
Mhm.
from opportunity and housing choices. So
So if you're not sure,
give us a call.
if you're uncertain, give us a call.
Yeah, and I think that, because when I was, preparing for that, that really struck because I do think, we've all been in those situations, right? Where you're like, wait, did I hear that? Am I, and you're like, you're not sure, right? And I think that it's good to connect to you guys who are, are
well,
professionals and knowledgeable about this to, kind of walk you through it.
Even if it's like one question
Yeah,
about housing, reach out to
yeah.
us. We can figure out a
Mhm.
way to answer that question.
And I might add too that even if it's not directly related to housing discrimination, we can also direct you to another organization or to somewhere else where you could get more advice. Yeah. So I think, I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit more or.
Yeah, so the majority of the calls even though we're focused on housing discrimination, we get a lot of calls about people who just want to know about their fair housing rights. What are the rights that they have under this specific housing situation? So in that scenario, we can provide resources. We can just walk you through what you're experiencing, give you some level of like guidance as to where to go to. So we can do just simple
That's great too.
referrals
I
like
mean,
that
that
too.
itself is.
Now, part of that guidance is, I understand also, you will go out and do education type presentations at
Yeah.
various organizations.
Mhm.
Maybe just give us a
Yeah, sure. So we provide education services. We go to outreach events. We can really present to any sort of group, honestly. So local community groups, places of worship, um, where else? So senior centers, I think any sort of community group or faith-based or maybe a specific niche organization. Anusha goes out actually with our team, the outreach team, and does a lot of different presentations. Sometimes we even do tabling events. We've been to
Resource fair,
resource fairs.
villages.
Yeah,
Yeah.
even the Pride event that's happening in Long Island, we've attended some of those as well too. So we really try to make sure we're out there in the community and really making ourselves accessible to everyone. You can also go on our website at fairhousingjustice.org. And there, if you're interested in more outreach events or any sort of resources on our website, we have once you go on there, there's a column for resources, and you can see pretty much everything, knowing who should be held accountable for discriminating or certain housing needs. You'll figure out what your rights are, especially as it relates to source of income. So if you're using Social Security or whether maybe you have a family, because there's a variety of protected characteristics the state covers, and also Nassau and Suffolk County. So really, any group can reach out to us. Any sort of organization can come to us, and we'll go to you. We go out into the community, especially the areas that we serve. And if it's somewhere else, there's other groups that we can refer to.
I just think, as I sit here, the education piece, we always say we're so fortunate to have this show where we're able to feature organizations, like you guys, because, people don't know. And I think too, like, I was just saying, like, with like the rights, I bet you there are so many people that are just not even aware of what their rights are in that situation, and a lot of times I think, things are just kind of like just pushed under the rug, or just kind of like, all right, well, it didn't work out for me, so now I gotta, you just start from square one again, and it's just, so I think that by meeting with you guys and getting that information, I bet you all of us would be so surprised to read the specific rights that you have, under this act.
Yeah, and spreading awareness is key.
Yeah.
Like you said, I want to emphasize a lot of people don't know about their fair housing rights. And that's why there are like organizations like ours to inform them, to reach out, to make connections with other organizations so that we can spread that awareness.
Yeah. It's definitely worth reaching out.
Yeah.
The more information you have, the better equipped you are to know how to navigate the housing space, especially like we were saying earlier, we're in an affordability crisis, right? Like it's affordability and just like a tight housing market.
availability.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
And
There's not
yeah,
enough
right.
units online. There's not enough housing online for people to really access it. So it's unfortunately we're getting a double whammy or, or
No, of
something
course.
like that.
Right,
So,
One of the discriminations you talk about is disabilities.
yes.
Could be physical, I assume, and maybe mental disabilities.
Yeah.
Just give us, touch on that a little bit.
Yeah.
What are the main kinds of issues as far as the physical part goes? And then you might have people with cognitive problems also, which is the whole thing is very complicated.
Yeah, so with disability discrimination, we assist individuals who need reasonable accommodation and modification. So there's two key difference between an accommodation and a modification. A modification would be a structural change to a unit, and an accommodation is a change to a rule or some sort of policy that the building has. So an example for a reasonable modification would be if you're a wheelchair user and there is no ramp in the building and you have a difficult time getting in and out the building. That's a structural change that you need a ramp to get in and out. Or if it's an accommodation and there is a no pet policy and you have an emotional support animal or a service animal, those are not considered pets. They are there to do a particular type of service. So in that case, we could also help with making sure that that person's accommodation is, that's an example of.
Now, would this, like all these laws and rules, apply to, let's go back to the two-family house scenario. Uh, Many homes on Long Island are not main level ready normally. Uh, and if you have a two-family home and you again, you typically maybe will wind up with family or friends, but suppose that doesn't happen. Are you obligated as a homeowner to have that home set up to handle somebody with a physical disability?
Yeah, that's a really great question, actually. So the laws vary depending on where you are. So let's say in New York City, the landlord is responsible for making those modifications. In terms of Nassau and Suffolk, it's a bit more complicated. And so I'd recommend if someone is having an issue and let's say they need that or they don't have the finances, maybe the landlord can't afford it, you can definitely give us a call. We have a fund called the Adele Friedman Fund, which really was established and named after one of our clients that we served. She had difficulty getting her condo modified, and so she called us. She reached out, and we were able to help her. So I do think when it comes to homeowners. And I think folks in Nassau and Suffolk, because the law is a little bit more complex and not as simply laid out as it is in New York City, I would recommend that you give us a call.
Well, we're going to take a quick break and dive right back into that because I definitely want to talk more about the fund. We're talking with Britny McKenzie, Policy Director at the Fair Housing Justice Center, and Anusha Nair. And we're going to jump right back in after the break. You're listening to Project Independence and You on LIU Public Radio.
WCWP is your home for great music and great conversation. You'll find all that and more on WCWP.org. Listen live on the web, check out the lineup, subscribe to podcasts, and stay up to date on the latest station events. Get in touch with us and let us know if you like what you're hearing. And find out how you can support or get involved at the only community public radio station serving Nassau's North Shore. Plus, sign up to get a free bumper sticker. It's all online at WCWP.org.
Welcome back to Project Independence and You on LIU Public Radio. I'm your host, Kristina Liu, along with my co-host, Otto Los, and we're speaking with the Fair Housing Justice Center, Britny McKenzie, who's the Policy Director, and Anusha Nair, who's the Intake and Outreach Specialist. And before the break, we were talking about it's just so complex, and that's what's really just hitting home throughout this whole interview. And that's why it's so important for people to reach out to you because it can just be so complex. And so many seniors in the town of North Hempstead, for example, it's a big town and there's all different communities and some communities, are, mostly apartments, right? And there are older apartments that, are certainly not as accessible. And these are questions that we've, received so many times, that, because as you age, there's different things. You might need the walkway, the doorway to be bigger.
Not wide enough for wheelchair, which I had in my other home. I had my mother living with us.
Yeah.
We couldn't use a wheelchair.
Yeah.
And a shout out to Barbara Bartlett, who actually gave me your pamphlets about this because she lives in an apartment and she said to me, and it was such a relatable thing because she said, listen, if you're a homeowner, it's kind of different. You have a little more flexibility with making different modifications and stuff. But when you're in an apartment, you don't necessarily have that same thing. You have to get approval for certain things. And, through our program too, we're partnered with Rebuilding Together Long Island, who, will go into the homes of our seniors and put in, grab bars.
Nice.
Ramps get a little tricky because there's different guidelines for each community. But, as far as like a railing,
Right.
we do. And when it's a homeowner, it's like, okay, no problem. The homeowner signs off. They say, great, like I'd like this, but with the apartments, there's so many layers to that. And like, so if you are in, it's a big apartment building, do you have to approve a grab bar to be installed for, if someone is requesting a grab bar in their apartment, or does it vary based upon, apartment building?
Yeah. I would say whenever you need an accommodation
Hmm.
or a modification, you always want to reach out to whoever is
Hmm.
responsible, right? And so usually we recommend that folks write, have a letter
Hmm.
written where they ask for the accommodation or the modification in writing to make sure that they have that. And then from there, let's say if they're struggling with maybe hearing back, or maybe they don't even know what to write on
Right,
the letter, excuse me,
right.
they can give us a call, or they can email us, and reach out. And, Anusha, one of our intake, and outreach specialists, would be able to assist with that and kind of walk them through the steps and what
Yeah.
that looks like. And, you mentioned, there's different types of buildings and
Hmm.
they're, maybe configured earlier in
Yeah.
the, late 30s. I don't
Yeah,
know.
no, I mean,
And
and
so,
that's a lot of the apartment building in North Hempstead.
yeah.
It's been, they've been around for a long
Yeah.
time. So
And then
it's,
and yeah, some of them might be hard to maybe structurally change. And that's when Anusha was talking about the differences between an accommodation and a
yeah.
modification. Maybe you'll put in a accommodation request, which
Hmm.
would be like, can I be on the first floor?
Yeah.
The third floor is a bit too much. I'm having mobility,
Yeah.
issues, and that can happen to any one of us.
Yeah, of
Mobility,
course. I mean, like
issues.
life happens,
Life
to
happens.
anyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Now, who
yeah,
would be responsible? Would it be the owner or the person who wants to come in to the apartment?
mhm.
Does it vary all over the lot or to pay for
I'll pay for a
modification?
modification.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
varies. So if you're talking about a rental unit, and you make a request to the landlord does have a level of obligation to make sure they're able to do what you're requesting. So if it's a modification or an
Mhm.
accommodation. So in general, it does vary.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, like
And
I could visualize somebody wanting to rent, but maybe the landlord can't afford to
right.
pay for
Mhm.
these
Yeah,
modifications.
Yeah.
there are certain scenarios where, landlords really are unable
Yeah.
to like do the
Hmm.
modifications
Hmm.
requested because it could be like a financial reason or
Hmm.
there's some other reason. So in that scenario, reach out to our organization and we can have a conversation about what's going on. We
Hmm.
can try to do a little bit more digging and verifying as to
Hmm.
what's going on to figure out a way to help you get the modifications you might need.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
whether it's like a
Cute.
physical
Yeah.
change or an accommodation, I think, if it's something that you need to stay safe and independent in your home, the Adele Friedman Fund might be for you. And that's when you really should reach out. I will say the Adele Friedman Fund helps to pay for evaluations by architects or contractors,
Oh, wow.
and actual construction costs for the modification. And so again, we said a little bit of examples of like installing a grab bar. Maybe it's a building ramp to navigate stairs, or even adding a flashing doorbell light for someone who's deaf, or maybe widening a doorway, like you mentioned for your mother. Wheelchair users need a wider doorway. So those are some examples of what we could pay for. And like I said, like we've been saying, it's a little bit more complex in Nassau and Suffolk. And so the best thing to do is reach out, via email or via phone and give us a call.
Let's go back a notch.
Yeah.
Explain what the Adult Freeman Fund is.
Yeah.
This is all through that fund?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So the fund is, so for example, Barbara
Hmm.
Barlett, she called us, gave us a call, and it got to the point where we had to send out an architect to go visit, to look at it, to see what, needs to be done. And
Hmm.
I'm putting this in the most simplest terms,
Yeah.
right? Because it's
Yeah.
a bit
To
more
do the
complex.
assessment, to
Right.
measure stuff.
Sure.
Exactly. So yeah, so the architect would do that and that would be paid through the fund. And once it was recognized that okay, we can do this, it's necessary, then boom, it goes on to the next step
Yeah,
where they pay for the actual modification and then install.
the fund would.
Yeah, the fund
And
would.
there's obviously different criteria for who can take advantage of the fund, right?
Right. And it's very flexible and also again very I'm blanking on the word. Flexible and I would say very unique to each person.
Right.
Because like Anusha said earlier, you know, there's situations where the housing provider, the landlord, small landlord, you know, maybe can't afford it and it's a financial issue, or maybe there's another reason,
Yeah.
you know, so the fund would be able to, you know, pay for that. So the best thing to do is give us a call. So don't exclude yourself and say, oh man, you know, because I live in a small unit, you know, there's only 3 apartments here, they won't be able to help me. Give us a call. We'll sort out the facts. There's different things based on the village, the town that you live in, and so we'll help you get it sorted.
And now, do you have to, is there like an income guideline to access the fund, or as you think it's kind of like unique and niche to the particular situation?
It's also pretty unique
Yeah.
to the situation.
Yeah.
Yes. But like we've been emphasizing, when you need an accommodation or a modification and you're not sure where to start or how to go about it, you need help documenting it. You need help, you know, having that conversation with the landlord, or you're not sure what kind of specific modification or accommodation you need, always just reach out to us.
Yeah, and I just,
Yeah.
it's just so huge because I'm just thinking of all the seniors that we deal with who are alone.
Yeah.
And I'm not alone, and I couldn't handle half of these things, doing this on my own. So it's you're unfamiliar of it. So I think, just the idea too that they could call you and have you, have, those conversations and facilitate, how to go about it. I mean, in itself is just
But
so
just
huge.
one question now, is this something, this is the people who can utilize this fund are, I would visualize, not a single home family. In other words, I own a single family home. That's not for me. This is geared to people who rent out uh, apartments or apartment buildings.
So no, it's, again, becoming more flexible, and very depending on each person's circumstance. So like I mentioned earlier, the Odell Friedman Fund, which is what this is, was named after someone who had an issue having a modification to her condo. So she owned it.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a little flexible. We're doing our best to make sure that we can assist as many people as possible. But again, for understanding whether you'd be able to utilize the fund, call us.
Yeah.
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 And just to point out, it doesn't always have to be the person who needs the modification to reach out. It could also be like a family member, or a friend. It could be anybody. It could be you reaching out, or it could be you reaching out about someone who would need a particular
An
type
aid.
of,
Anybody who
yes,
can reach out.
anybody. Yeah.
That's
Yeah, on behalf. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really. I mean, it's just it's you guys provide so many different services, and I think just the process alone can be just so overwhelming for someone, and I could just see a senior not asking for the help that they need because it is so cumbersome. I even know with my own parents, who are fully, capable of things, like just get over what as they gotten older, it's like the littlest thing,
Yeah.
can be like just feel, heavy and cumbersome. And with this, it's to have you walk them through the process. I just can't even stress what a wonderful, godsend that truly is for people. It's just
Yeah.
huge.
I could visualize today's immigration world adds another dimension to this whole thing. As I visualize it, because people who are here legally or illegally have to live somewhere, uh, hopefully, and not on the street. And I can imagine that gets into your world somewhat. Am I right? Does it become complicated? We don't have to get into, well, we do have to, I guess, but there are a lot of people who've been in this country illegally, you can call it, for a long time. And they've settled in and they have jobs and so on. And I would think that adds another dimension to the discrimination factor when you're looking for a place to live. Um, and I'm not looking for you to tell me,
Yeah.
how you break the law or anything like that. But that I just feel like that would add a whole new world of complications.
Yeah. Actually, there's no complications at all.
Yeah.
So, the Fair Housing Act, but more importantly, New York State human rights law and Nassau and Suffolk have a wide variety of protections, including national origin, race, and then statewide. So it doesn't matter where you live in the state of New York, you are protected if you're an undocumented immigrant. So citizenship and immigration status is a protected class. And so yeah, New York is making it rightfully so that everyone has a right to live somewhere, as you were saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
There you go. See, Otto, it's
Well,
not, it
but
wasn't as
no, I mean,
complicated as you assumed it
I'm
would be.
not,
No, it's just,
But I'm glad you have us here.
Yeah.
It's a great question that you
Yeah.
asked because
Exactly.
I'm trying to deal with both sides, the real
Right.
world,
No,
and
it's a wonderful
walking
question.
La La Land.
We're here to
Yeah.
spread awareness, and a lot of people don't know that.
yeah.
Right.
So now they know.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Well, I mean, my parents were immigrants, all right. I relate to immigrants.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not so easy to get here through the right channel. So you get here how you get here, and then hopefully you're able to live a happy life.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah. And if folks do feel like they're facing, discrimination or they're not being able to access housing because of their status, their citizenship, or their immigration status, they can reach out to us and give us a call and we'll help them, figure it out and make sure that
Well,
they
that's
get
important.
access to the housing.
Area, frankly, especially
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah. Yeah. In this temperature, in this climate.
Yeah. Yeah.
and each case with housing is so unique.
Right.
All the
No, and I think
factors
that's
so
important, right.
unique.
It's not like a cookie cutter,
Yeah. And we
so-
have
Housing, food, and water are like three things that, it would be nice to have.
And back to the Adele Friedman Fund because I was saying that I was so intrigued by and with like, let's say they deem that someone needs a chairlift, right? Is that something you guys can get involved in, as far as modifications or like would that be covered under there?
yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And like so obviously with the trail, I'm not sure of the logistics of it. I imagine there's, holes that need to be made and screws. If the homeowner, do they have to agree to that or be like, no, I don't want holes being put in my wall, the whatever the modification, do they always have to agree to, putting that in or how does that go?
That also
Unique.
Or it's not just like a
Unique, yeah.
specific law.
Yeah, like I think the
very
architecture,
unique.
the architect,
Mhm.
the professional that's going to be working on that, I think could provide a variety of different ways
To do it.
yeah, and think about just like the structure of that because maybe it's coming from a concern of like, well, I think these nails are gonna eventually erode the wall. I need to
yeah, because it gets so complicated.
yeah, and especially thinking about the different ages of housing, right? So yeah, I think that's like a valid question, and luckily we have some great architects in the Adele Friedman Fund who
and
can.
there
Yeah,
and
it's awesome.
just
like
to
that.
just to summarize, there's many unique ways to one problem.
Right.
So if it's like a ramp or like a chairlift or a grab bar, there's like different ways to go about it that would work for everybody.
Yeah.
But especially for the person that needs the
Yeah.
grab bar or whatever accommodation it might be.
Yeah, that's just so, and I would imagine too, they, because you have specific architects that are involved in the program, they're open to thinking outside the box
Yeah.
and
Right,
how to
right,
get the,
yeah.
so it's so great to have that, because I mean find your own architect, I couldn't even begin to.
Me too.
Yeah.
Word architect,
Yeah.
sometimes it spells to me money, all right?
Yeah, exactly.
Certainly, absolutely.
I had exposure to that, and it adds a lot to whatever the issue is. So somebody's got to pay for the architect.
Yeah.
And that could be an issue for the home
Yeah.
provider or whoever.
Right.
So that it all is part of the unique solving of the problem. I
It's a
think.
win-win for everyone, I just imagine like on just all sides of it, just having this, kind of team come in, and solve a problem, like, it's just really a wonderful thing, and because like the homeowners don't have to worry about paying for it,
Exactly.
it's
And that goes back to documented, undocumented, legal homeowner work or handyman work.
Yeah, right. It's certainly
There's a lot of
complicated.
rules nowadays about what, you need this approval, that approval,
Right.
whatever, and the whole process gets very expensive.
Yeah.
And like I said, and just overwhelming, at
Very
its core,
overwhelming, yeah.
it's just a lot. So it's just having an organization like you,
Yeah.
so many areas you cover.
Exactly.
It's just really
And in
absolutely
my
incredible.
world back when, people used to do a lot of stuff themselves without authorization.
Yes, and then they're like, uh-oh. Well, I would like to thank Britny McKenzie and Anusha Nair from the Fair Housing Justice Center, who really just gave us such wonderful information today and just so important. If you would like to get in touch with them, you can call 212-400-8201. Thank you so much. You're listening to Project Independence and You on LIU Public Radio.